7 a.m. in New York City. Today is day 12 of Israel's war with Iran, and let's get right into it. A dramatic announcement overnight from U.S. President Donald Trump that Israel and Iran had agreed to a ceasefire, ending their 12-day war. Now, the ceasefire was supposed to begin at 7 a.m. Israel time with a complete cessation of Iranian missile attacks. But just minutes before that, Iran launched a wave of attacks against Israel. And while most were intercepted, one struck an apartment building in Beersheba, killing at least 5 Israeli civilians and injuring at least 20 others. Our reporter Shosh Bedrosian was at the scene this morning and spoke with an officer from the IDF Homefront Command.
We had an Iranian missile that struck that building. In that scene,
okay,
we had
I can't
4
hear
casualties,
him. I hope
4
I'll be
casualties. We had over 25 wounded people that were evacuated to Beersheba Soroka Hospital. And what you can see behind me is our search and rescue teams, the Homefront Command teams that are working, searching in every floor, in every room, just to make sure that there is no people left behind. We don't know of any people that are currently left behind, but we're searching to make sure. The missile, apparently what we understand currently is that the missile actually struck the bomb shelter in the building. That's where the people actually stayed. And as you can see, when the Iranian missile, there's more than 500 kilograms of explosives struck the shelter, the bomb shelter, the chances of surviving are slimmer, way slimmer.
And let's go now to our Shosh Bedrosian in Beersheba.
It is extremely hot outside. It's actually hard to imagine that crews are working here with this amount of equipment on them, their helmets, all of their gear layered on top of them, as they still work to sift through this building, as you can see behind me, absolutely destroyed here in Beersheba. Now, we know that 6 waves of Iranian ballistic missiles came through early this morning, and the one that impacted this one was the second wave around 5 a.m. Now, officials say that the home here, the apartment building, actually took a direct hit from the roof. They say that the ballistic missile came from the roof, destroying the top 2 floors, and actually everyone here was pretty much in their shelters at the time, doing everything that they were supposed to do in order to survive this. And officials believe that likely the people that were killed were the ones that took the direct hit to their bomb shelters on the backside of this building, which is absolutely devastating. You know, Lidar, we've continued to say over and over again, as this war continues now with Iran, that getting into people's safe room is the safest place you can get. Either your mamad, the protected room in their own apartment, or the miklat, the protected space at the bottom level of the building. They say these are the safest places, but when there is a direct hit to these mamads and these protected spaces, that's when the outcome changes. And we're here just dealing with something devastating. We know that 4 people were killed here. I do know at one point they were still searching for someone on the top floor. There were crews on there. They were way up top, nearly hanging and dangling off where the debris was. You know, President Herzog actually came here just moments ago and talked about how enormous the ballistic missile actually was. He said it was Iran's, one of the biggest missiles they actually have that they used today that penetrated this building right here. When I tell you the damage is disturbing, it's devastating, this is yet another attack on a residential area here in Israel from Iran. I also want to mention there is a school here, an elementary school, that sits right over here. Can you imagine if the Homefront Command was different and children were allowed to go to school today? So this is just a devastating loss for the community as all of this continues to go on. Lidar?
Now, in an apparent breach of the ceasefire, late this morning, 2 Iranian missiles were reported fired toward northern Israel. Iran denied reports of those launches, but Defense Minister Israel Katz said he ordered the IDF to respond strongly to Iran's violations of the ceasefire. According to the terms of the ceasefire, Israel can continue its airstrikes on Iran until 7 p.m. local time tonight. The Office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement confirming the truce, saying that Israel had achieved all of the goals it had set for Operation Rising Lion, and that, quote, in full coordination with President Trump, Israel has agreed to the president's proposal for a bilateral ceasefire, But he added, Israel will respond forcefully to any violation of the ceasefire. Also commenting on the ceasefire was IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Effie Defrin.
בהמשך להנחיית הדרג המדיני, הפסקת האש נכנסה הבוקר לתוקפה. הבוקר ניתן לומר, צה"ל עמד בצורה מלאה בכל היעדים שהוגדרו במבצע עם כלבי. הרמטכ"ל הנחה את צה"ל לשמר רמת דריכות גבוהה ומוכנות לתגובה עוצמתית על כל הפרה של הפסקת האש. גם ברגעים אלו, חיל האוויר משמר כוננות אווירית להסרת איומים ולפעולות התקפיות מהירות. לפני כניסת הפסקת האש לתוקף, הבוקר נורו כ-20 טילים מאיראן לאזורים שונים ברחבי הארץ, רובם יורטו. צוותי פיקוד העורף, כוחות ההצלה והביטחון, נמצאים כרגע בשטח ונותנים מענה באזורי הנפילות. לצערי, ישנם הרוגים ופצועים בזירת הנפילה בבאר שבע. חולצו מספר לכודים חיים.
Now, today's ceasefire came soon after limited rocket attacks by Iran on U.S. bases in Qatar and Iraq in retaliation for the American airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The Iranian attacks caused no damage or injuries to U.S. forces, which were reportedly warned in advance of the strikes. That appeared to be a face-saving gesture for the Tehran regime in order to pave the way for today's ceasefire. Now, it was soon after that President Trump announced the agreement of a ceasefire in a post on his Truth Social account. The Trump statement read, "Congratulations to everyone. It has finally been agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire at 7 a.m. Israel time. I want to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war." Now, ahead of the ceasefire, the Israeli Air Force struck missile launchers in western Iran ready to fire at Israel. The action prevented an even larger, deadly barrage this morning. Last night, the Air Force revealed extensive strikes on Iranian military and regime targets in Tehran. The IDF also released video of key assets and symbols of the Iranian regime being hit, including facilities of the Revolutionary Guard, the notorious Evin prison, and the destruction of the so-called countdown clock ticking down to Israel's destruction. Now, while most Israeli officials welcomed the news of the ceasefire, there was criticism from some opposition politicians, with Avigdor Lieberman, head of the opposition Yisrael Beitenu party, saying that, quote, a ceasefire without a clear agreement will only lead to another war in 2 or 3 years under much worse conditions. Well, joining us for more now is Dan Feferman, chairman of Sharaka and a Middle East analyst. And Dan, thanks for joining us. A lot to break down here, but let me just get your immediate reaction to the news of this ceasefire this morning. All right, we're having some audio issues with Dan, so hopefully we'll be able to connect to him in a little bit later. Well, moving on, the IDF Home Front Command announced that current wartime restrictions would remain in place until it was certain
an Iranian missile that
all right, sorry for that. Moving on, the IDF Home Front Command announced that current wartime restrictions would remain in place until it was certain that the ceasefire will hold. The Israeli Airports Authority said that Israeli airspace would be gradually reopened, with an increase in flights returning home the more than 50,000 Israelis stranded abroad by the war. Now, given the damage caused by Iran's attacks, it will be a long, hard road for many Israelis to return to some semblance of normalcy. And how do ordinary Israelis feel about today's announcement of a ceasefire? Well, here's some reactions from the streets of Tel Aviv that we took this morning.
I was glad to hear about the ceasefire this morning. Regrettably, it's a bit too late for me and my family because our house back here was totally destroyed in the recent bombings last Sunday. But as they say, better late than never. And I hope this ceasefire is a new beginning for Israel and for Iran and for the Middle East. And we're really hopeful that it holds together.
I don't trust them. And I think we are in a very hard situation that we can be damaged again. It was so hard, the damage we felt 2 days ago. So I think maybe
Can you hear me?
It's very, very, very hard to trust them now. I have mixed feelings because I want peace, I want quiet. But I'm not sure they will that we can be peace and quiet. I feel very, very sensitive, very in a big stress still since what happened.
If this will be the end for the next, let's say, 20, 40 years, it will be great. Unfortunately, I don't believe that it's going to be like this, and we will see soon, hopefully.
We hope now we have Dan Feferman of Shirak and a Middle East analyst with us. Dan, are you with us now?
I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So, Dan, let's start again. First of all, a lot to break down here. I want to start just by getting your reaction, your immediate reaction when you heard the news this morning of this ceasefire between Israel and Iran.
Well, I think this whole week has been an absolute roller coaster that caught me as my plane was landing, and I was one of those who was diverted to Cyprus. And then, of course, the American entrance into this was another roller coaster. And then within 2 days, the ceasefire announcement that was then broken almost immediately. So I was expecting some kind of ceasefire announcement to be made regarding the U.S.'s entrance. The U.S. achieved everything it wanted to achieve. Israel achieved everything it wanted to achieve in this. And it seemed from reading between the lines, the Iranians were looking for a way to climb out of this tree. And so that's why I was very cautiously hopeful. Of course, I can't say I was surprised when it seems that at least temporarily, that ceasefire did not hold more than a couple of hours into the announcement. And we were all very rudely woken up this morning.
All right. But so far at this stage, it does seem to be holding. Prime Minister Netanyahu saying earlier today that it comes as Israel has achieved all of its goals. But as I mentioned, there has been some criticism from figures such as Avigdor Lieberman that's saying it was premature and that 2-3 it just delays another war with Iran a couple of years down the line. What's your reaction to that? Were the goals of Operation Rising Lion achieved here?
I think the way Operation Rising Lion was planned out, was communicated, and then was executed was absolutely exemplary on the part of Israel. And of course, now that we know that it was also done in coordination with the United States. Israel does not have the capacity, nor should it have the desire to go after a long, protracted war with a much more powerful country of 90 million people, 1,500, 2,000 kilometers away. And so to set very clear, achievable goals of causing a significant delay, and what Israel seemed to achieve, and then, of course, with America's entrance 2 days ago, was a very significant, perhaps 10 years, perhaps even more, delay to Iran's nuclear program, a huge setback to the ballistic missile program, a very clear understanding of what we want to achieve. We achieved it. Thankfully, there were no losses of life to our military forces who bravely flew and conducted very dangerous missions over the skies of Iran. Unfortunately, we had some civilian casualties in the Iranian retaliation. And I think this is one of these instances where we need to gather our wins and cut before it descends into something that we can't control and we can't sustain over time.
Okay, let's look a little forward, and there are many aspects that can be addressed here. One, we have to say, and the U.S., President Trump making an unprecedented decision to launch an offensive operation against Iran. even though, as we know, there are many in the U.S., even in his own political camp, that were opposed to this move. Let's talk about the impact of that on the U.S.-Israel alliance going forward.
You know, this is something that I've never seen the divide between the policy elites, those in the know, and those in the government versus much of the American public. The American public seems to think one of two or maybe even one of three things here. And I think this is a dangerous development as we analyze American public opinion. They seem to think that this was not an immediate threat on the United States. And so they are being dragged into a war by the sake of Israel. And here you see a lot of anti-Semitic motifs and tropes coming into play here, the power of AIPAC, Israel, America doing Israel's bidding. Secondly, you see a lot of armchair analysts who really have no idea what they're talking about, saying Iran either never posed a threat to the United States. It's the United States and Israel that are the aggressors here, and Iran is defending itself. Iran was at the negotiating table, and Israel and the United States literally and proverbially blew up the negotiating table. And you see a lot of these dangerous motifs in the American public discourse. I think time will tell. I think those in the know, in military circles, in policy circles, in national security circles, understand that Israel did really the dirty work for international security here, did a huge favor for American national security interests, which might not have been immediate for American concerns, but they certainly are important. And as Iran was really at its low point as far as its ability to wage any kind of war against the U.S., U.S. allies, U.S. interests in the region, because it had been so depleted, because its air defenses were taken out by Israel, and most importantly, because its proxy army had been so weakened around the region. This was really a perfect storm, politically, geopolitically, regionally, and then, of course, Israel having had done 3/4 of the work, according to U.S. sources, for the U.S. to join in and finish this off and cause a massive and significant setback to Iran's nuclear capabilities. And of course, Israel set back Iran's ballistic missile capabilities significantly.
Right, and let's take a regional focus now. And through your work with Sharaka, you help build ties between Israelis and Jews and Israel's Arab neighbors. The regime in Tehran was not toppled, but certainly it's been significantly weakened. What do you see as a regional impact now moving forward, if indeed the war is ending here?
Yeah, there's a number of things we can look at regionally. One, this is a regime, and I'm in touch with people around the Middle East, the broader Middle East, and expats from all over on a regular basis, journalists, analysts, and lay people. This is a very reviled regime, and it's understood regionally, certainly in the Gulf countries, that this is no friend of anybody. And so a lot of people around the region were happy to see this military action. They were also very happy to see that there was very little collateral damage, very few civilian casualties in Israel's strikes. And I think, unlike what unfolded in Gaza, which is much harder to explain to the region, this is much easier to explain. What you're going to see now, at least in the short term, is Iran's regional standing took another major hit here. It did already with the downgrade of Hezbollah, with the fall of the Assad regime. And you saw a lot of people in this region celebrating the potential of a new Middle East. Now Iran has taken another major hit. Its nuclear program has suffered a major setback. Its ability to be a regional hegemon and a regional bully took a major hit, and a lot of countries in the region are happy about it. Of course, the Gulf states, especially, what they fear, and living as close as they are to Iran, relying on trade and commerce and regional interconnectivity, which is the whole point of the Abraham Accords from their perspective, is they were afraid that this was going to cause a massive regional spike in tensions, perhaps Iran taking out its retaliation efforts on those countries or on the Straits of Hormuz. So I think they're breathing a sigh of relief. I think they're quietly, even though they can't say it out loud, very happy that Iran's ability to be the bully in the region was downgraded. The one thing that I think we all need to be cautious of is given the extent that Iran had been penetrated on an intelligence perspective by Israel, and we saw the results of that in the initial outset of the war and how many people were targeted. Will Iran now crack down on its own citizenry, something that is going to have negative effects, of course, for the Iranian people?
And finally, Dan, you mentioned Gaza. A lot of Israelis are now today starting to going to start turning their focus back to that. Do you see the outcome of the Israel-Iran war having any impact on the situation in Gaza and the prospects for some kind of end that would see all the hostages returned and Hamas, of course, defeated in Gaza?
Unfortunately, I don't. I think we're at a point that Iran's support for Hamas in Gaza was cut off long ago. And so the most that Iran can do is rhetorical support, social media support. But as far as financial support and arms to Hamas in Gaza, that was cut off long ago when Israel went in and took control of most of the Strip. What you're seeing now is a very recalcitrant Hamas leadership, whatever's left of the leadership, that will be really hold on to the reins of power as hard and as long as it can. It wants to use every last one of these hostages. That's really all it has left. It can't commit strikes, certainly on Israeli territory, in any meaningful way anymore. It can conduct, and it is conducting, guerrilla attacks on Israeli forces in Gaza. But what it's going to do is hold on to the remaining hostages as long as it can and try to squeeze out a ceasefire that keeps it alive, keeps it in power. And I just don't see any way that this blooding of Iran and its nuclear program or even its regime has any kind of effect on the Gaza arena, unfortunately.
All right. Well, let's hold out some hope for that. But just the end of this conflict certainly brings some relief to Israelis. Dan Feferman, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, even if the war did end today, the road back to normalcy for many Israelis is going to be difficult, considering all the destruction, the damage that was wrought over the past 12 days. Now, many NGOs are stepping up to help the authorities in bringing relief to the Israeli civilian population. Among them is the International Fellowship for Christians and Jews. And joining us now is the president of the IFCJ, Yael Eckstein. Yael, thank you for joining us on what I hope is going to be a happy day. Let me start, but your work and the work of your organization will go on, and let's talk about that. You've had a lot of experience in helping Israelis, especially as we're looking at, for example, those people who have lost their homes, thousands in these strikes, even today in Beersheba. Let's talk about maybe how you're helping to address that.
Well, we see our role at the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews as being the first responders of humanitarian aid, specifically in times of crisis. So from the moment that first Iranian missile landed in Israel, our fellowship staff and volunteers were on the ground, not just making plans and not sitting at round tables, but actually distributing aid. In the past week and a half, we've distributed over 10 million shekel of aid. So specifically for those people who lose everything that they own in an instant when the rocket strikes, we're there within 12 hours to provide them with an emergency card that they can go and buy a toothbrush and pajamas for their kids and new shoes. They're left with nothing. And we've seen that these missiles are striking in some of the most poor neighborhoods in Israel. So in the vicinity, I was in Bat Yam, and I saw around 2 kilometers around the main area that the rocket struck, almost none of the apartment buildings had windows. They were all shattered, and yet there's still poor elderly, homebound, many of them living there. And so we're on the ground. We're bringing food to the people who need it, emergency supplies. We're giving this a card that the evacuees can buy whatever they need that they can decide after they lost everything what they want to buy. And we're placing over 100 bomb shelters in Haifa and Tel Aviv so that more people can find that protection they need when the sirens go off.
All right, devastating what happened there in Bat Yam, another community badly hit. Of course, is Beersheba. We saw that this morning, and we saw that, of course, earlier this week at the Soroka Medical Center. And I know that your organization has had a special relationship with them over the years. Maybe let's talk about that and your involvement with that.
Well, after the 2006 Second Lebanon War, the Fellowship realized that the wars are now on our home front. So we've been doing whatever we could to secure the home front. We've placed over 4,000 bomb shelters across Israel, specifically in the periphery. I never thought we'd see a day where Pikud HaOref, the home front command, said that Haifa and Tel Aviv are the most at-risk locations right now. But we've been focusing on hospitals as well. And so at Soroka, we've provided them with a Mimugan, protected surgical unit that they were actually using when that rocket struck. Emergency equipment. We've, of course, provided different hospitals, NICU and labor and delivery protected areas, underground hospitals from Afula to Haifa. Whatever the hospital, each hospital has different needs and different ways that they're preparing for crisis. So we leave it to them to decide what's priority. But of course, we're also working to support the heroic first responders, Magen David Adom, Hatzalah, providing them with protected ambulances and first responder gear. So wherever we're able to help to save lives in real time without any bureaucracy, that's what we do and where we go.
Right. And finally, I do want to talk about your group's work with Jews and Christians, pioneered by your father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein, who I knew pretty well. What's your message to them go through this difficult period? As you know, we have a lot of viewers, of both Jewish and Christian viewers on ILTV. So your message to them today.
Well, I think what we're seeing is a spiritual warfare, not just a diplomatic warfare. We're seeing this evil death cult that's trying to spread across the world and actually having a lot of success. And then we're countering that with the sanctity of life, with hope for the people who need it most, with food and clothing and the basics. And I think the answer to darkness is always light, and that ultimately goodness always prevails. So what we represent at the Fellowship and the vision that my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein of blessed memory, saw over 40 years ago is that there's a silenced majority, Christians, who stand with Israel and the Jewish people, who pray for Israel and the Jewish people. They might not be on the front page of the newspapers or have the biggest social media pages, but there are hundreds of millions of them around the world. And that's what we at the Fellowship are honored to represent.
All right. And of course, we've seen the Fellowship respond to Israel in its moments of needs over the years and several occasions, and certainly rising to this occasion as well. Yael Eckstein of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of this broadcast on ILTV, On the Hour, live from Israel and the Middle East, every hour on the hour. Remember, it's the only English news that is delivering live updates around the clock. And we will continue to follow the developments here in Israel. As we said, a dramatic day, the announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, ending the 12-day war between those countries. Hopefully it'll stick. Stay with us for more updates as developments unfold. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.